Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. Today we have the newest member of the Clay and Buck Podcast Network with us, Ryan Girdusky, and he hosts a weekly podcast called A Numbers Game. He is a political commentator who authored the book, They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the National Populist Revolution. And they're not listening, Ryan. I mean, we're watching this just this week, how insane it was to see what they did at the congressional address that the president had. I want to call it the State of the Union. It's not a State of the Union. He came and he addressed Congress and they were ridiculous.
That was like the most raucous thing I've ever seen. But also the fact is, like, look at the conversation about Europe and Ukraine in the last couple of weeks. There are serious commentators, serious people who spend their whole entire lives hating Trump, who are foreign policy analysts, who are sitting there and saying Germany and Italy and France and Japan, they could be the new leaders of Western liberalism. And you want to be like, how delusional are you? Like, where is your brain going? Because none of these countries, one, have enough young men, have a military the size of America. None of them have enough young men to create a military the size of America. And the whole world is propped up. The whole neoliberal global project is propped up on American welfare state, American USAID, American trade policy, American Navy keeping the seaways clear and empty or safe rather. All of this is dependent on America. The whole world is an American welfare state. And so the idea that Germany is going to sit there and do it, Germany, I mean, with who? All their Turkish migrants? That's who's going to sit there and be the German military to defend the Ukrainian borders. It is delusional on like such a level.
Well, and Italy has a huge population problem. I mean, you talk about not having enough young men. They actually... It's interesting because they did universal basic income in Italy. It was a complete disaster. It turns out that if you give people money for not working, it was a situation where I think it was you had to stay in your parents' house until you were 30. So all of these people didn't work. They got universal basic income. They stayed in their parents' house until they were 30, didn't date, didn't get married, and then in their 40s finally got married and couldn't end up having kids. So now they have a huge population problem because it turns out giving away money doesn't actually work. It doesn't make good stewards of money, and it doesn't make good members of society. So you're exactly right that was never going to happen. But I find it fascinating that we went through probably several days of the mainstream media being like, he has destroyed the situation with Ukraine and Russia. He embarrassed Zelensky. He bullied him. He's a friend of Putin's. And then I think it's like so Trump for him to stand up in front of that room. Just read the letter from Zelensky that's like, hey, man, I'm going to come to the table. I'm ready to make a deal. Doesn't say sorry, but everything but sorry for being a total dick in the White House. and Trump just reads it. He doesn't say, like, I told you so or anything. Hey, I got this letter. I'm like, he is so perfect at the way he manages the show of all of it.
Because he's the only person in the room who sometimes remembers we are the United States of America. Yes. We are the indispensable global nation. There is no plan B out there. Like, who are they? They're going to turn to, France. I mean, the joke writes itself to run its own military. So, I mean, there was no other way around it. And I think the situation in Ukraine is so important because and this is something that Vice President Vance talks about a lot. And I used to work for Vice President Vance, so like he's very thoughtful in this manner, but they are losing so many people in this war. What is the point of having Ukrainian borders without Ukrainian people? There will be no people left. I mean, it is a crisis situation like you cannot imagine. It's going to be the biggest global downfall of a human population, the global demographic winter, the biggest demographic winter in Western history, like since World War II, in one country. They won't be able to sustain that. They'd have to literally triple or quadruple the birth rate in an immediate period of time in order for that to sit there and make up for their losses. It's just not going to happen. And I think that that's a big question worth saying. What is the point of borders without people?
But that is what is surprising to me about this crazy liberal side that has just recently changed. It used to be that the radical left was all about saving lives and everybody had to have a great quality of life, and we had to come in if you didn't have a good quality of life and give that to you and make sure everything was fair and all of this. But why would you want to extend this war? Where has the narrative gone off the rails that they think that if you stop the war right now, that you are on the side of Putin? He wants to stop the death. I mean, to your point, what do you do if you run out of people?
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. I mean, that's the French for a legion to sit there and step in. No, but the thing is that they want this war to continue because they still think Putin made Hillary lose the election. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to the fact that they still believe Hillary would have won had it not been for Putin. And Putin has created this they dislike Putin. Think about this. They dislike Putin more than they dislike the Chinese Communist Party, who created COVID.
Yes.
And they dislike Trump more than they dislike Putin. So this is really where the mind rot moves, and they can't accurately allocate blame. And the biggest problem of the last 25 years of global foreign policy is that, one, we failed to sit there and stop throwing Russia in with the Soviet Union, because they are not the same thing. America has never fought a war with Russia. And secondly, right after the Cold War ended, America's foreign policy was to isolate Russia and embrace China and bring China into the global community. And that has caused mass devastation. It has caused a mass deindustrialization across the West. We are very dependent on them, not only in America, but in Western Europe. And they are a lot less like us culturally than the Russians are. And that was a big, big, big mistake. And now, 25 years in, 30 years in, how do you recalibrate in any which way possible? I think isolating Putin has clearly not worked in the long term. And Europe is dependent on their cheap oil. It is much, and so is China. I think it is much, much harder going forward of how do you create a situation, well, one, a post-Putin situation, because Putin is not going to live forever. How do you look into the future and sit there and say, we can no longer isolate Russia the same way, and we cannot let China be the world's manufacturer as it continually looks towards Taiwan, as it looks towards taking our vital chip factories and our vital chip manufacturers over in Taiwan. This is a very, very serious issue. And I think someone has to look forwards instead of backwards at both the 2016 election and the former USSR and say, how do we have a new world with Russia post-Putin? Because that's going to happen in the near future.
And I think that the propaganda arm of the media has stopped people from being willing to see the fact that you have to have a relationship. Like this idea that presidents don't have a relationship. I mean, Obama had a relationship. You've heard there's been a video recently going around about Bill Clinton talking about his relationship with President Putin and the discussions that they used to have. So that has to be there. However, if there's any discussion of this now, this is suddenly all of the young people get completely riled up. And I think if you just look at that speech from the other night and how they acted, the behavior, the shenanigans. And I believe that, I mean, there was rumor ahead of time that the Democrats were told no shenanigans. It's not going to help us right now. The guy just won the popular vote. He just won the Electoral College. Like he won with a mandate. And if you come in there and you have all these shenanigans, this is going to be very embarrassing for the Democrat Party, but they just can't help themselves. I say that this is the party of, I mean, you've got the geriatric cane waivers and the mean girls. And that was
there were so many canes. There were so many. At one point I said, how many canes are there? And I don't know how old some of these people are, but they're so old that their teeth don't fit anymore. So it's like moving in their mouths while their mouths are shut. It is so strange to look at. And the thing is like those are the last sensible. I mean, Al Green's a little wild one, but like if you look at like the 80-year-old Democrats and late 70-year-old Democrats, and no shame on age, it's an honor to get to age, but they are in office for a little too long. But if you look at those Democrats, they are far more sensible than the ones coming up behind them.
Yes, right.
Jasmine Crockett sitting there and doing TikTok dances with AOC, like as they're cooking. It's very, very strange. There's like a lot of noise going on, and for some reason they keep on saying, "Hey, let's find a suburban woman who doesn't blink and make her our spokesperson." And that's like their solution to like the communication problem. At least the senator from Michigan, I thought actually did a fairly decent job at the response. But then they had a response to response, and she was crazy. And then they all took their own turns. I think this morning giving their response to the State of the Union, and it was just like, wow, you guys need to like take a breath and take a beat and actually have a concise message, because there is a message for them to sit there and have on a number of things, but they've kind of like lost the game. They've lost the narrative. Anyone who doesn't think the last election that Trump had wasn't a huge victory, I mean, they're really desperately trying hard to cling on to some narrative that just doesn't work anymore.
Well, I think part of the problem is they are used to this attack politics. The last 4 years of Joe Biden was very nasty. He would come out and in his speeches, his last State of the Union, there were times when he was holding up his hands and yelling and he would talk about Trump endlessly, even though Trump wasn't in office. He just couldn't let it go. And that was for the last 4 years. So I really believe, I mean, I've thought a lot about the way they acted, because that speech that we saw on Tuesday night was the president coming out and saying, look, this is the display of Americans that you have heard about for the past 4 years, or at least the past 2 years of us running for office, and that moved people to say this country needs a change. It was the personal stories. They weren't props. They weren't campaign propaganda. These were true Americans with true American stories. And he didn't come out and bash the other side. He came out and he said, these are the stories. This is the follow-up on those stories. And this is how we're going to thank these people. And I think the Democrats were so used to hearing Joe Biden come out and go, the other side is bad and this and that, and we've got to save democracy, that they walked in there thinking this was going to be a similar rhetoric, but it wasn't. It was very positive. It was very unifying, and they looked like fools.
Well, I also think, I mean, if you listen to like liberal conversations, progressive podcasts, those progressive people, they will say things like, we are literally in a civil war.
Yes.
Nicole Wallace followed up the State of the Union, or not State of the Union, but the joint session of Congress, with saying, I hope this, 13-year-old cancer patient doesn't kill himself after being assaulted by a Trump supporter. Like, they are genuinely off of their rocker. Like, it's not every Democrat. It's just the spokespeople and these podcast hosts and these Twitter followers or these Twitch streamers who have these, not immense followings. It's not 100 million people, but it's enough to sustain like the talk economy, the economy of people who want to just have conversations and make a living with advertisers with it. They are genuinely out of their minds. I watched, like 2 days after the election, I watched Mary L. Trump's podcast to see what she said on election day. And they were literally sobbing out loud and like having nervous breakdowns. It's the greatest. I'm telling you, you want to laugh for 3 straight hours. Like they're like, before the beginning, they're like, we're going to win Florida. It's delusional. But
right, yeah.
But they were at that level. They were at that level for so long. And it's kind of like, imagine like a rabbi in ancient Judea who all of a sudden sees Christ rise from the dead, and they have to sit there and say, okay, am I going to convert, or am I going to give up everything I believed in, or am I going to just stick to my old ways? And a lot of them were having a literal come to Jesus moment of saying, oh man, you mean cutting off a girl's breast at 13 is not a popular idea? How do I deal with that? Because that's what I've been feeding my 25,000, 30,000 fans who pay my bills every single solitary day. How do I not be this crazy? And they genuinely cannot. And they are just, the loudest men in the year. And that's why I think you're seeing some politicians. Today, Gavin Newsom was like, I don't think boys should be in girls' sports. I'm like, you were attacking Tennessee for banning that just a month and a half ago. So
you've taken children away from parents who refuse to allow surgery. So
right.
you don't get a vote here.
Right, exactly. And I think it's them sitting there and saying, how do I kind of backpedal now, because I was so high on my own supply for a while.
But this is where Republicans cannot cede ground, because I watched some of that interview with Charlie Kirk, and I saw, and look, I come from a sales background. I saw exactly what Gavin Newsom was doing. My son loves you. He wouldn't even go to school today. You are the one making a difference. And Charlie says, no, I've got to give the credit to Donald Trump. No, Charlie, this was a movement you started well before Donald Trump. And he's smiling. You look at the body language. If you understand sales, man, this guy is laying it on thick, and he's good at it because he seems really genuine. He is the scariest politician, I believe, out there, because he can get you on his side so quickly. He romances people. He seduces them with
Tim
this.
Walz. That's not the most
Exactly.
politician.
That was their mistake. They've got a snake that is very hard to identify, and they chose to go with the
the communist
bizarre
Fred Mertz,
yes,
from I Love Lucy, yeah. I agree, and I think that also the fact that here's the thing, but the good thing on the Republican side is that Democrats will no longer nominate white men to any national ticket. It's got to be black or women from here on.
That's what you think, but they seem to like. I mean, look, they screwed over everybody to put Joe Biden on, and I'm always cautious about that, because I think that they say that, but then you end up with that guy that seems like the historical politician. And I think the party is slipping, because you talk about the people who are all the Kane waivers, and you've got Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi was the most depressing character in that room the other night to me, because here's a woman who, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, she had a lot of power, and she was a psycho about it. I mean, the stories about Nancy Pelosi are hardcore. Like, you walk into her office and she pulls out your binder and she's like, "You're going to do this because I've got this." She was a cutthroat, scary operator in Washington, probably one of the most corrupt people. But there she is, looks like she's chewing her cud, sitting there like you said, her teeth are all falling out. She's got her cane. She's desperately trying to hang on to power. But you don't even, I mean, once a person her age breaks their hip, it's just not it is real. The numbers are not good for you to live past a year after you've broken your hip. And that's just a medical fact. It's very sad. She looks like she is on the track toward the grave right now. She's in her 80s. She's 85 years old in a few days now. This is a woman who should have stepped down. But this is also a woman who, when she had the opportunity, when AOC started to catch on and the squad came in, and that was the time for all of that psychotic power that she had, for her to crush that and say, "This is not our party." And she screwed it up. And she won't let it go.
She did slap down a lot of the squad, and
not
the AOC
enough.
Well, I mean, their numbers are lower. The Jamal Bowman lost, and she didn't do anything to lift him up. The other girl from Cori Bush lost. She didn't do anything to help her. She definitely recognizes the problems of them being around. I mean, they had a conversation with Ilhan Omar after she said 9/11 was a thing that happened. Like, she's done, I think, enough to dance around it. But at a certain point, the party moves past you.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that the party moved past her. Sometimes you are staying too long at the fair, and I think maybe she stayed a little too long at the fair. But I mean, to her kind of credit, though, I mean, look at the guy who's Hakeem Jeffries. He's no Nancy Pelosi.
No.
He could not whip people into sit there and say, "Okay, you're going to give up your house seat because you're going to vote for Obamacare, whether you like it or not." He would never be able to sit there and do that. He doesn't inspire that kind of confidence. And I think that the idea of who represents the future of the Democratic Party, I don't know. Bernie Sanders, who's like 177, is doing like a road tour right now. So maybe that's just gonna be it from here on out. Like, Bernie will just keep living and just keep doing like his old thing every 4 to 8 years. Like, I don't know, but I mean, he's the one, I think, out there sitting there having a real conversation for Democrats where they're at. I don't really know. It's not going to be Gretchen Whitmer, who's gotten Botox to like the nth degree that she's going to pop. And it's not going to be Gavin Newsom. It's not going to be Josh Spiro. They hate Jews. Maybe it'd be Wes Moore. But they have a serious leadership problem as who's going to be the face of the party going forward. And a lot of people want it to be just somebody who screams like, imprison Republicans, and they wanted like Cori Bush was probably too far to the right for them, and they need someone to be their leader, and they don't have it yet, and I mean, I guess we'll see, but that's their big problem, is they don't have a leader or a solid message.
No, they don't, and so that takes us to I wanted to bring up the faith issue, because we had seen the interest in faith slowly every year kind of declining Christianity in the United States. Suddenly that's leveled off. that is a big deal. And people go, oh, it's just leveled off. No, there has been a rise in young people seeking out a church, seeking out a mass, trying to figure out exactly what the purpose is. And as you see, I really think since 2020 with the pandemic, people started to go, man, there's got to be more here. But I think this idea of what we've seen from Hollywood and that there is nothing but what is right here in front of you has led to a lot of lost souls, and that is changing. So what's your take on that?
On my podcast, The Numbers Game on the Clay and Buck Network with you guys, I broke down the Pew Research study. The Pew Research study had a poll out that found that the number of Americans identifying as Christian was flat for the last almost 10 years, which is very unusual because it's been declining year in, year out. And the three groups that are responsible for that are boomers, zoomers, and millennials. They've all people born in the 80s, people born in the 50s and 60s, and people born in the aughts, in the 2000s, really saw about a 5-point shift towards being identified as Christians, but especially among people born between the year 2000 and 2006. Now, they're praying slightly more than they used to. They're attending church slightly more than they used to. They're actually, ironically, much more attending church and praying more than people born in the 90s. But they are identifying as Christian more or less as a form of identity. As I sit there, it's young men, primarily young men. It is the only generation in history where men are more religious than women. And I think that part of it is that they're being culturally Christian, right? They are saying, like, I am Christian, therefore I'm maybe not woke. I am not, like super liberal. I am not an atheist who sits there and wants to talk about veganism all the time. Like, I am not these things, and therefore I'm Christian. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily attending church or praying daily. But I think a lot of times that comes along with children, like having kids when you start attending church regularly. But the door's open to it, to them being Christian. It's not like it was for generations where it was like, no, this is all, just spaghetti monster in the sky kind of stuff. Or that's where they were sitting there saying, no, this is all nonsense. They're saying there's something there, but they haven't formulated a direct relationship with a singular church or practicing it daily. But they're saying, I am culturally a Christian. This is how I see myself in the greater context of the country.
So you believe that there is an opportunity for Christians to kind of seek these people out and say, hey, come join us. How does that happen? I think that politics has kind of pushed people that way, because I think that I even think that people saw what happened with Donald Trump and the assassination attempt and went, how could that have happened? I think there were some people at that point that said, there's got to be something else.
Well, I think that just shows that all young. I mean, in the post-election analysis, everyone said, "Look at Barstool Sports. Look at Joe Rogan. This is how. Look at Tim Dillon or Andrew Schultz. This is why young men became conservative or Republican, especially like younger white men." And none of those men are religious. None of those people are religious at all. And I think that for every kind of conversation about like those people that they were having, like the Joe Rogans of the world, there is, Ben Shapiro and the whole Daily Wire squad. They talk about their religion, and there are multitudes of different kinds of religions a lot. There's that Canadian writer whose name I always forget. He's not for me, but his wife just converted to Catholicism. I think that she had a recent death scare, and I'm blanking on his name, of course, is a big best, the 10 Reasons of Life or whatever guy. There's Father Mike Schmitz. He's a Catholic priest. He had one of the biggest podcasts, in the country, which is like a Bible in a year and catechism in a year. There are people on alternative media that you can go seek out for reason, logic, truth, and faith that are not part of even like the Netflix shows or the streamers or the other stuff, streaming services, or forget about basic cable or the major platforms, the major companies that sit there and make movies and stuff like that. There are very few that are doing that. There are more. There's like Angel Films and stuff like that now, but there are a lot of people on the internet who talk about faith, who talk about this, that are reaching out and hearing, and young men are hearing them. And they don't all just go to like the Joe Rogan, Barstool Sports, comedian world. They are literally looking for something real in this entire conversation of politics, in this conversation of what it is to be an American. They're looking for something authentic. And I think that because they are searching and they're just not writing it all off, they're not all as nihilistic as maybe Gen Xers were. They are sitting there, that opens the opportunity to a future where once they get married and they have kids, going to church could be part of it, going to religious schooling for their children could be part of it. Like, those things are all potential for the future, and it doesn't have to be this N-word, slope towards Gomorrah. Like, that doesn't have to be the future.
Well, I mean, I think that's what we are hoping to see, and that's what we pray about regularly, is for young people to come. I mean, that's what I just had this conversation with my daughter the other day. She was like, what if it's hard for me to find a husband? What if it's just a struggle to find somebody that's good? And I said, this is why you pray about it. This is something that this is a good question for God. Pray to him.
That's true.
But that is kind of a
arranged
conversation.
marriages, either which one.
Right. If not, mom will take care of it. No, I'm just kidding.
If not, I will
Don't
find
worry.
someone.
We've got this. No, I think that God's got this. But I think it's fascinating. And I want to welcome you to the network. I'm so excited that you are a part of it. We watch what you do. It's been amazing. And I think you've got a great voice out there. So Ryan Girdusky, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Tudor.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. As always, you can check us out at TudorDixonPodcast.com, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us next time. Have a blessed day.